That's right. On today's The Football Discussion podcast, we're going to be talking about the 2020 NFL regular season MVP odds and who we should be buying our future ticket on.
You the real MVP.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Just as a disclaimer, these odds were taken February 10th from a few different books, looking at the best prices that we could find. As somebody who works in a sports book, I understand how important it is to bettors to shop around at different books and make sure that they're able to get the best price available, so that's what I tried to do. So we'll go ahead and get started with the favorites. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is going to be right up at the top of that list. He's sitting at plus 600 or 6-1 right now. No reason to expect that Patrick Mahomes is going to have a drop-off season next year. Even though the Chiefs are looking like they're probably going to lose Sammy Watkins because he's a very expensive option for really an ultimately number 2, maybe a number 3 receiver on their team. But the Chiefs, they still have Andy Reid. Mahomes is going to ball out. He has every reason to succeed next year, coming off a Super Bowl MVP year. I think one angle that people are going to take that I really don't think makes a lot of sense is this is a contract year for him, so he's going to want to play well. Where I stand with Patrick Mahomes is that I don't think he can cost himself any money right now. I think where he's at, he's already solidified himself as a top 3 no matter what, probably the best quarterback in the NFL, so he's going to get paid no matter what. It wouldn't surprise me at all if it's in the neighborhood of $40 million a year. Normally I wouldn't really recommend betting on a favorite just because you have to pay such a high price, and the NFL season has so many things that go on. Obviously last year Patrick Mahomes with the injury, Lamar Jackson seemingly coming out of nowhere, so really tough to convince somebody to bet on a favorite, but I do still think there is some value in Mahomes because betting on the best player in the NFL right now isn't certainly a bad bet for them to win the award for the best player in the NFL. Next, we'll go to Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP, unanimous MVP, only the second ever, which is a hell of a feat. So the thing I feel about Lamar Jackson is that he may have hit somewhat of a peak last year, and you might have saw that in the playoff game. And I don't want to overreact to one game, but I think you might see next year defenses starting to figure him out, and that really his production is going to slow. Teams are going to have a little bit more film, a little bit more data on how to stop him in the read option. I'm not going to try and convince you that he's not a good passer because I myself don't even buy that angle. I think he's a quality passer. Certainly not as good as probably other top 10 quarterbacks, but obviously he makes up with that with his ability to run and the threat that poses to defense. They want to stack the box, and that's going to make his throws a lot easier for him. But I do think he is poised for a letdown. I mean, going 14-2 and winning the MVP, it's kind of tough to imagine to go even higher than that. Seems like he'll eventually have to come back down to earth a little bit. And the one thing that really scares me about him is if you can really trust him to play from behind. When you're forcing him to throw, you're able to drop back into coverage, and you don't have to stack the box. Can he really lead a team from behind? Every time he's trailed, he's had to run less, and playing catch-up for him, he seems to get nervous. That's not really where he excels. You know, he's a front-running quarterback. He likes to play from ahead. And if you get down on him, trust me, he'll beat you right into the dirt, and you'll be done for halfway through the fourth quarter. You'll be out of the game. But playing from behind, I really just can't get on board with trusting Lamar Jackson. Plus, right now, you're paying about plus 650 or 13-2. It's really tough to get on board. That's a lot of money to pay for Lamar Jackson, the second most favorited MVP odds right now. So this is a bet that I just don't see a lot of value in. I see the Ravens coming back down to earth at least a little bit, and there's a lot of other great teams that they're going to be playing this year. Obviously, I think the Browns are going to have somewhat of a step up, maybe meet some of them expectations that people talked about from the previous year. The Steelers are getting Big Ben back. They still have a great defense. They're going to be a tough team. So I think there's going to be a little bit more competition in the division, which obviously you're playing both of those teams twice a year. So I really just don't like Lamar Jackson for a future ticket to an MVP. And not to keep harping on Lamar Jackson, but the next person we're going to be talking about is my MVP from last season, Russell Wilson, currently sitting at about plus 900 or 9-1. The reason he was my MVP last year was because he had a fraction of the talent Lamar Jackson had around him. Pete Carroll constantly likes to handcuff Russell Wilson and not just let him go out there and play football the way he does best, and always constantly trying to establish the run and running on first down every time, and on third down kind of asking Russell to save him and gather it all together, rally the troops, and go get a first down, and he's doing that all game long, all season long. You know, I really think Russell Wilson should have had a lot more love in last year's MVP race. He really carried the Seattle team. They had a really tough schedule, and they were constantly in one-possession games, and nobody was coming up bigger in those moments than Russell Wilson was. Right now, he's the third favorite to win the MVP, and the reason that scares me a little bit is because they're going to have a really tough schedule next year, Seattle is. They still have to play the 49ers twice, the Rams twice, which, say what you want about them, I still think, they're a competitive team. Obviously beat Seattle once last year. And then you have the Patriots, the Bills, both really top-end defenses, maybe the two best in the NFL possibly. The Jets, who are a respectable defense, you can't take them lightly. And also he's going to have to travel to the Philadelphia Eagles. They had an average defense last year, and the Vikings had an above-average defense last year. So, definitely Russ is the problem in a game. It's not the defenses that are the problem. I would bet on Russ over defenses any day. But to think that he's going to be able to do it consistently every game for 16 games, because to win an MVP award, you really can't have any bad games, maybe just one. Bad game can really cost you the award. So, really tough defensive schedule. He's not going to have much leeway. Don't know how much Pete Carroll's going to actually let him play to the best of his ability. Pete Carroll just loves to handcuff Russell Wilson and run the ball all game long, despite having a generational talent and a guy who, in the biggest moments, is his absolute best. Maybe one day Pete Carroll will have that figured out. We'll have to wait and see. But right now, Russell Wilson, he's got a really tough schedule. Plus 900, not super expensive, but also not someone, even as much as I like Russell Wilson, and I do think he's either the best or second best quarterback right now in the NFL, not someone that I think there's a ton of value to bet on right now. I'm kind of looking, you'll hear later in the pod, we'll be talking about some of the underdogs, some of the long shots that I think have a little bit better value for taking a future ticket on. So now we're starting to get up there over 1,000 right now. We have Watson at plus 1,200. I was hard on Watson coming out of college. I wasn't really a big fan of his. I definitely thought he was a gamer, but I didn't really think he'd be able to hack it in the NFL. And I do have to come off of that. He's absolutely proved me wrong. I think there'd be a long list of teams that would just love Deshaun Watson to be their quarterback. But at the same time, as far as betting on him to win MVP, I just can't get on board. Himself and the Texans really as a whole, they're just too inconsistent. They're up one week, down the next week, and I can't really trust them to put together a full 16-game schedule, and I can't trust Deshaun Watson to be consistent enough to win that MVP award, because like I just talked about earlier, you really don't have much leeway. You're probably going to have 10 to 12 great games with another 2 to 3 good games, and you really might only be allowed to have one bad game to win that award. So once again, I think with Deshaun Watson, probably just a little too expensive for me to pay to bet on him to win MVP. Definitely expect him to have a good year, but I'm not going to take a future ticket on him. Now we'll talk about two guys who have the same odds at plus 1,800, and these guys are constantly compared because they play in the same division. We have Philadelphia Eagles quarterback Carson Wentz and Dallas Cowboys likely quarterback, we'll see what shakes out there, Dak Prescott. Right now, both have the same odds. So what do we think about these two? I think that there's no doubt that they're both franchise quarterbacks. Both teams made good decisions when they drafted them. They've really proven a lot of doubters wrong. A lot to look forward to with these two guys. So right now, I think Dak probably has a little bit more to prove because he's still waiting on the big contract. I think he absolutely deserves the big contract, the $30 to $35 million. Carson Wentz still definitely has some things to prove. Obviously, all the injury history, he's taken a lot of flack for that. He's also battled through some of those injuries, and obviously last year down the stretch, as banged up as the team was, he still willed them into the playoffs with a couple of big wins down the stretch, one of them against Dak's Cowboys. As far as betting purposes, I have to lean Dak because I do think Dak has a better supporting cast. He has a new coach, Mike McCarthy, who really bolsters the passing game. That's what he's done everywhere he's been. Dak just came off his best year, and NFL MVP voters, they really like stat stuffers, and I think that's what Dak did last year. He filled up the stat sheet. I think he'll certainly be able to do it again next year, as long as they have Amari Cooper back, which obviously remains to be seen. That's kind of the big kicker in this discussion for me, is that if they don't have Amari Cooper, there's no chance in hell I'm betting Dak, no matter how much the odds change. I'm not solely betting on Dak just because I think he's better than Wentz. It's actually the other way around. I think Wentz is probably just a little bit better quarterback. I think Dak is still in the same realm, and that really just goes for any mid-tier quarterbacks that you're discussing. I mean, you look at 2016, Dak was better. In 2017, Wentz was better. And then in 2018, Jared Goff was better than both of them. And then, obviously, back to 2019, Dak was the best out of that bunch again. So really, anytime you're taking a bunch of mid-tier quarterbacks, it really depends on what time frame you want to pull from to try and say, oh, this guy's better, oh, this guy sucks, and, they're really all kind of synonymous. They kind of flip-flop around. So right now I am going to lean towards Dak just slightly. I don't think you can go wrong with either of these guys right now. Plus 1,800, that's not such a bad price to pay, pending any, trades, drafts, if Dak is going to sit out on the franchise tag or anything like that. So I'm leaning Dak. Next up, we're going to cover the only multiple-time MVP winner, 3 times to be exact, Tom Brady at plus 2,800. Even as the biggest Tom Brady fan, I don't think there's a lot of value in him at 2,800. You kind of have to be holding out hope that New England is going to do some crazy offseason work and really boost up their wide receiver core, fix the tight end position, get a little bit of offensive line help that they need. When you watch him play, I definitely think the arm strength is still there. I don't really buy any of that fall off the cliff talk. I think he's smarter than ever. He moves in the pocket better than ever if you watch the film, which a lot of people obviously don't. It's just more fun to have a hot take, but that's a different discussion for a different day. Last year, the weapons really just weren't there. I don't know how much New England can improve it. They don't have a ton of cap space. Obviously, Brady's going to eat into some of that when he signs his contract there, assuming he does. I'm definitely confident he'll have a bounce-back year and kind of quiet some of the people who say he's done and he should retire or anything like that. But I just can't get on board on him winning the MVP. I just don't see New England being able to do enough in one offseason alone to really give him a fair shake at winning the MVP. He's definitely still good enough to win, and definitely still good enough to win in the playoffs, I think. But to really win the MVP award, to be the most dominant player in the NFL right now, I just don't think he has enough around him. And maybe his play has slipped a little bit. I don't think it's as dramatic as some people make it out to be, but I just can't get on board with him taking a future ticket. Even at plus 2,800, still not a good value for me. So we do have to show some running backs love, so we'll get into 2 of them right around the same area. We have Christian McCaffrey at plus 2,500, and then we have Ezekiel Elliott at plus 2,800. I see these guys as kind of opposites in some ways because I see that Christian McCaffrey is probably going to be the focal point of the Carolina offense, but I don't think that team's going to win a lot of games. They're going to be kind of miserable. I do like their coaching hire, Matt Rule, but I also just don't see them really making much of a splash this year. Christian McCaffrey, he'll fill up the stat sheet, but I don't think it's a real actual chance to win the MVP award because if you're not winning games, voters aren't going to like that. It's going to be all these great stats, but nothing to show for it. On the other hand, I see Zeke, as good as he is, and as much as he definitely will be used, I think in some sense he'll be taking a back role. Mike McCarthy isn't really known for establishing a great running game that's been documented before. But the Cowboys, I think, are going to have a good year. I think they're going to be able to win some games. They have all the talent in the world. McCarthy's a good coach, and I think they'll definitely be a very competitive team right at the top of the NFC East. But I think they're going to be winning those games by the passing game. I really do think they're going to put a lot on Dak. They're going to build around him, and they're going to put their faith and trust in him and tell him to go win games. And really, in general, in the broader scope, NFL MVP, that's a quarterback award. It's going to be tough for any running back to win that award. I mean, you look at what McCaffrey did last year, having over 2,000 yards altogether, and they still no love for him. If I had to choose between one of the 2, I guess I would probably have to lean Zeke just because they're likely going to be in the playoffs, and assuming he were to take off for another 1,800-yard season, say 10-plus touchdowns, which I think is really realistic for him, he could be in the conversation, but I think the other side of the coin is that it's going to be Dak that's going to be the reason or given the credit for why they win games. That's the thing about the quarterback position. They get too much blame and they also get too much credit. Really just not a running back award, so I don't see any running backs this year really making a real run at the MVP award. Okay, next we're going to get into one of my favorite bets. He's currently sitting at plus 4,000, and here he is. Everywhere you look, everywhere there's a heart, a hand to hold on to. That's right, 49ers quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo, formerly known as Uncle Jesse on Full House, sitting at plus 4,000. But all jokes aside, I actually really like Jimmy G's value at plus 4,000. That's very inexpensive. He started less than 30 games, so there's no reason to think that there's not still more to get out of him. I think he still has more left in the tank, even after people want to roast him for really struggling down the stretch in the Super Bowl. They're going to be right back in it next year. You got Kyle Shanahan, you got a good defense. Hopefully they re-sign Emmanuel Sanders for Jimmy G's sake. They have Deebo Samuel coming off a good rookie year. He should look to step up even more in year 2. If you really watch the games, Jimmy G, even though he might not have carried that 49ers team, he really definitely was one of the reasons they were winning so much. If you put a bad quarterback in there, like they had the year before, they're a 4-12 team. Now maybe they could plug in another mediocre quarterback and still win, 8 to 10 games, but make no mistakes, Jimmy G is one of the reasons they are winning, and it's going to be one of the reasons next year that they're winning games. I think He's certainly not a front runner. That's why he's at plus 4,000, but there is a lot of value. Look for him to take a big jump next year. I'm really excited for his season next year. You watch him play, and he really just wows you with his arm talent, his mobility in the pocket, getting more and more comfortable. You think of anybody that's only started 30 games, you always talk about, oh, well, their potential, their future, what can they do as they learn, as they grow. So there's no reason to think that even though Jimmy G might be a little bit older than a lot of the guys who have started only 30 games, that there isn't still more for him to grow. Can't wait for his season next year. Definitely going to be taking a future ticket on Jimmy G at plus 4,000. All right, so let's show a little bit of love to the youth. Kyler Murray, a guy that I liked coming out of college, and nobody watched him play because he was in Arizona, and they took fourth in the division. They weren't a very exciting team. But if you watch Kyler, the guy can play. He's got really good arm talent. He's a freak athlete, obviously drafted to play baseball as well. This guy can play, and plus 2,000 is where he's at. Little expensive in my opinion, but I really still think there is some value there. They're probably not going to win enough games for him to make a real run at the MVP, but anything's possible. I really, really like Kyler Murray. I think he's going to be able to have a great year and follow up his Rookie of the Year campaign with really taking the next step, getting the most out of that Arizona Cardinals team. I would really say that I like him more as a player than an MVP candidate just because I don't think he'll have much of a fair shake to win the MVP. The talent around him is just, it's forgettable to say the least. Another couple of young guys looking to be rookies next year. We have Tua, I'm not even going to try the last name, for plus 8,000, and Joe Burrow, surprisingly not quite there. He's at plus 10,000, so a little bit more value in Burrow here, despite being the number one pick. I actually think that these two guys mirror each other really well because I think they're both going to be obviously going in the top end of the first round, which are going to be really bad teams. Tua likely going to end up in Miami, in my opinion. Their team, even though they might have surprised some people down the stretch with a couple of wins, despite the roster being awful, the roster is still awful. I just don't think there's enough around Tua in Miami for him to really make any real strides at the MVP. Rookie of the Year, definitely a conversation. But plus 8,000, nobody saw Lamar Jackson coming, so maybe there's a little bit of value there. And I think the same thing about Burrow. Cincinnati, just a terribly run organization. Really wish he wasn't going there because I really like watching him play, and I'd like to see what he's capable of. Maybe he can turn Cincinnati around, and maybe Cincinnati can turn themselves around along with Burrow. But I don't think, for the sake of the 2020 season, I don't see Burrow really making any serious stride at MVP. AJ Green, he might be out the door. Tyler Eifert, for what he's worth, he might even be out the door. Not a whole lot to look forward to in Cincinnati. Burrow will probably struggle because they might just throw it all on him and just let him go out there and play and learn like you saw with Peyton Manning back in the day. And that's not to say that I think Burrow is a Peyton Manning type prospect because those only come around once in a lifetime. I'm not going to put that pressure on Burrow. But I do think that if they know they're going to lose, they might as well figure out what they have with Burrow, get the most out of him, let him show what he's worth, let him continuously learn. So that way, 2-3 years down the stretch, as they build around him, he'll have the experience, and then down the road they can win games. It's an investment for now. Hopefully it pays off later for Cincinnati. All right, one last quarterback I want to talk about before we go ahead and get out here. You know him and you love him or you hate him. Here he is.
And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
That's right, Cleveland Browns quarterback Baker Mayfield, one of the most polarizing figures in the NFL, currently sitting at plus 4,000. Coming off a down year where expectations were probably a little bit too high, and those are mostly set by the media, so you can decide if you want to buy into those. Unfortunately, I think Baker did a little bit, and he ran his mouth a little bit too much. And even though I am a really big fan of Baker's, and I really do have an optimistic look at what he can be in the future, I do think he played into it too much, and he was part of the reason, one of the biggest reasons as a quarterback, that the team had a really let-down year. Obviously, a lot more goes into it. The head coaching carousel that they're always going through. Freddie Kitchens just being an absolute mess all year, having no control over the team. Myles Garrett being suspended. Odell Beckham's comments being blown up, probably out of proportion, but still. And obviously all the injuries with Odell and other guys on the team really contributed to them having a down year. But I am a little optimistic about Baker. I think he can have a bounce-back year. I don't want to sound like I'm holding on to too much of the hope of what he did his rookie year and the expectations that were set at the beginning of 2019. But I am optimistic for this Browns team. They are in a really tough division, though. The Steelers are going to bounce back with getting Big Ben back. Still a good defense in Pittsburgh. And then you also have the Ravens, who are going to be probably right at the top of the division again. They'll be a tough out for any team. Baker at plus 4,000, I don't think it's a terrible bet. I mean, I talked about how I like Jimmy G so much at plus 4,000, and I would argue that if the Browns do a little bit of work on their offensive line, OBJ stays in Cleveland, comes back healthy, which I expect him to be, that there's a lot of weapons around Baker, and Baker's absolutely a baller. So if I'm going to take Jimmy G in San Francisco with a good team, but probably still not the supporting cast offensively that Baker has in Cleveland, I feel like I have to take Baker at 4,000. I'm not telling you to take out a second mortgage and put it on Baker to win the MVP because, as we learned last year, you can get burned very easily by having a little bit too high of expectations, especially with such a poorly run organization that the Cleveland Browns are. But I definitely think there is some value in Baker. Something I will consider taking a future ticket on, especially if anything happens that might move it to plus 5,000, plus 6,000, say like an OBJ trade. So Baker, if you wake up feeling dangerous 16 times this year, you're going to win the MVP. You have every reason. You have all the talent. You have enough talent around you. I'm rooting for you. We'll have to wait and see. Okay, so just a chance to wrap up my final thoughts. The bets that I really like are Jimmy G and Baker at plus 4,000, mostly based off value. Typically, I really hate front runners. I hate the favorites. There's just no value in them. And as much as I hate them, I hate betting against Patrick Mahomes more. So plus 600 on Mahomes, not terrible. I can't see that number getting any higher. The earlier you buy, the better. You're not going to want to take a future on Patrick Mahomes during the season because he's going to come out week 1 and throw for 400 yards, and week 2 for 400 yards, and week 3 for 400 yards. So buy now if you're going to get in on Mahomes. Now's the time to do it. The two that I'm going to stay away from are Lamar and Watson. Watson too inconsistent. Lamar probably going to have to come back to earth to some degree. Patriots fans, take getting Tom Brady back on your team as a victory, and don't go throwing all this money on Tom Brady at regular season MVP, future tickets. Don't do it. I am your host, Colby Cummings, and thank you again for tuning in to the Football Discussion Podcast, where today we got a chance to look at 2020 regular season MVP odds.